Oh, I'm recording now. Hi, Anne-Marie. I was wondering if we could have a quick chat about keeping children safe document, because this is what most DSLs are doing at the moment. I thought we could break it up. Look, you've got yours as well. I thought we could break it up into sections. So could we do section 1, just have a quick chat about section 1?
Of course. Yes, so you fire away and then we can talk.
Right, so the first thing I've noticed is they've taken out any COVID at all. There's hardly any mention of COVID in that. And do you think that's a good thing, or do you think how do you feel about that, COVID being taken out of it completely?
COVID is, my understanding is COVID is embedded in our daily lives. A bit like the common cold, a bit like flu, etc. You know, the vomiting bug, you off a few hours. So we would go down the same route of medical care or first aid or requirements, what you would normally do for those. So we need to put it on that list of another infectious disease where we take caution. Do you understand? So like with vomiting, I know, you're for 2 days, aren't you? Same thing. Any symptoms of COVID in the sense of what your school has as a model would be something that you know how to follow that up in your settings. So that's what I would say in what I've picked up on. I knew I had an idea that was going to happen, and so it's now embedded in everything rather than its separate document.
The only thing I think that I wish they'd put a little bit in there is that there is a chance that parents are going to elect a lot more self exclusion, if you like, or self-isolation. And I'm slightly worried about Munchausen by proxy. I think it feeds into that, and that's not really embedded in it at all. And I thought that would be in there, because there'd be a lot of parents who will worry and will take every opportunity to remove their child from school. And I wish that was brought up in there, that schools need to look out for parents that maybe, not saying it is a safeguarding issue, but it could hide safeguarding issue.
But one could argue that, like you would in ordinary safeguarding under specific safeguarding issues that we have, that is already in there, FII. Okay, so with that being in there, that's now on that page, as in be more aware of those scenarios where a parent is choosing not to send their child in because of their own anxieties. Does that make sense? So it's the same aspect of child being targeted of having something when they haven't, and the thin line between us working in partnership, the early help model, the normal, and then when it gets to that cutoff point, we know what to do. So it's fine. And I'm sure given doing the maths, there'll be times when looking a year forward or 2 years forward, there may be more cases that we pick up on. Do you understand?
Yeah, right. The second, probably the biggest change in the whole of it, but specifically in part 1, is the amount of mention of sexual harassment, peer-on-peer abuse, victim blaming, consensual and non-consensual nude sharing. I mean, there's a lot in there, a lot of peer-on-peer abuse and stuff like that in there. I think that's not a surprise, is it? We are all expecting that.
Do you know what? I'm with Joy with that. I'm with Joy with that, because in what I do, being proactive, as you know, and yourself, this actually this brings us to a new conversation of accepting it is happening. So when we had it could happen here approach, we now have it is happening here approach. And therefore, what have we got in place to ensure that we can deter people from doing, empowering, educating young people to have a voice of understanding what it is and what it looks like, including their friends. And what are the reporting mechanisms, but also the bystander model. So I was really happy to hear from a DSL a few days ago who's now incorporated a bystander model in their whole school approach. And for me, that's what that section is, Kerry. That section for me is, we need to have it is happening, and what are we doing? So for me, a big thing is communication. Some young people can't talk, some would rather write or email, some would rather whatever. So we just got to be aware, don't have that one classic old school, which is speak to the DSL or speak to somebody. We have to have lots of different forms of communication, from online, big thing at the moment I'm hearing is online digital boxes, online worry boxes, digital worry boxes, having things online, whether it's an app, whether it's an email address, that someone is able to, on their own in a quiet space, tell you something, and us also naming different types of relationships. So I did a few audits in the last few weeks of term, and what really came out for me, and already this conversation with everyone's invited in that exact topic, is young people recognizing that some of those unhealthy relationships were actually part of their day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And it was really empowering to hear the young people say, I now removed myself from that group because I recognized that actually it was unsafe, but I was going along with it because they were my friends.
Yeah, empowering.
And it was really, it really was. You know, it was for me, it was a goosebump moment for me, you know, when I heard that. It really was nice to hear that. And I think that's what we're going for in the first term. So definitely DSL's listening in today. Please be mindful of, we need to accept in our day-to-day, there are opportunities for people to do this online, offline, on-site, off-site, and that's what we heard in the in the feedback. And what are we doing to acknowledge that, in getting parents on our same page as well, getting the young people on our page? We need a whole community support in this. You know, contextual safeguarding, for example, on the way home, in the local parks, the
bus drivers,
local street shops, absolutely, bus drivers, you know, to staff who do the gate, to the bus stops, you know, all of that, to the parent themselves, the carers, to the peers, you know, the peers coming forward to something about. So the more we have a stronger model, you know, fingers crossed, going forward, it'll be harder for those people to do things, knowing that we've created an empowerment model of, you know, what you're doing is, you know, you've upset me. I don't like what you're doing. Can you stop, please? And then other people recognizing, what, are you okay? You know, the classic of looking out for someone else.
Because silence can be confused with consent, can't it? And that's what a big thing is, trying to educate people that just because they don't say anything doesn't mean that they're happy with it. But that's I mean,
and also boys too, please, boys too, because I think we have to remember boys.
Linking to that, there is a lot of talk of CCE, not CSE in here, which is not something new, but I think it's going to be, I think a lot of staff are going to sit there going, what does CCE stand for? I mean, I think they know what CSE stands for. How would you define CCE then? Have I put you on the spot?
So I'm glad. I remember about 2017 was the first time I heard of the expression child criminal exploitation from a police force, by the way. And I was glad, because in my kind of social work profession, I've always seen young people, unfortunately, in custody seen as someone involved in the crime rather than being exploited. So for me, it was a bit of a moment of great. So now it's part of our day-to-day in a school model. It's even better for me, because they're minors, they're under the age of 18. They're vulnerable, they're teenagers, they're young people, they're impressionable. We know in the climate we're in at the moment, there's so many things happening, from belonging to lots of things, social media, that of course it's harder for us as that boring person to say don't do it, to actually the temptations of them doing. So I'm glad that we've now got that on the same page as CSE, because we also know CSE can be part of the CCE. And I think, you know, for DSLs hearing this part of the term, we need to do your acronyms in your insets, do a lot on your acronyms, you know, or what I say, I don't like the word county line. That's me personally, because it sort of keeps it.
I mean,
it's more criminal justice.
Go, oh, it's county line. When you explain
have that conversation, and have that conversation. But I think from the child-centered model, which is a big thing in the new KCSiE 21, is the child-centered model is child criminal exploitation, and in keeping, and also, I know you're independent school, but we need to bring all the other schools in it too. It can affect any child in any family, rather than we, you know, we're a fee-paying school, we don't have it here. You know, it's supply and demand, and therefore, whatever end you're on, there's going to be an end of involvement.
The other new things is they've got quite a few new links to mental health and behaviour. I'm going to be slightly critical here. I clicked on the link, I applied for the link to see if I could do it, and I was told, no, my county is not signed up for this. So as a DSL, I can tell you now, it's not as simple as going, click, we can apply for this link procedure. Some counties have signed up for it, so you can do the qualification. My county hasn't, so I'm guessing that there must be other counties that haven't. So that's just a tip for other.
That's interesting you say that, because I saw a university post a few days ago, or email, should I say, hence I get the newsletters, about the courses are now open. There's this, you know, 6-module course for the mental health leads at these universities for that. And it's sad that it's postcode lottery again, the classic, isn't it? Rather than every child matters, going back 2000. So I think, hopefully there'll be a catch-up stage, isn't there, where and you know, it will add up. But for now, I think stick to your mental health first aiders, what you're doing at the moment, and we'll catch up eventually. But also I've seen that mental health has been added also in the DSL role as well. So some schools have split it, some haven't, you know, so that's another add-on for you, and you know, in the sense of,
I mean, I've been looking at it quite a lot, and it keeps on getting confused with, because the mental health can be for teachers and or staff and pupils, and of course the DSL tends to stick to children. You tend to have another SLT who maybe is maybe the staff welfare and things like that. Yeah, so this role kind of bridges in the gap in the middle, I suppose, if there is a gap, but it can get a little bit confusing. And it does say they're meant to be on the SLT, so you start to worry, how big is the SLT getting? Does that mean that they're getting too big? I mean, I was reading quite a good book today about having, the more people you have on a team, sometimes the harder the communication is. So it is going to be interesting. I don't think they've defined what the role is, but I think it's 2025. The mental health lead has got to be in place, but they haven't quite told us what it is yet. So I think that's going to be, well, I haven't read it, but I could have missed it. I think that's going to be an interesting one.
And I remember going to a conference, it was actually a working group, sorry, at the time of the Green Paper. And I remember DSL's been quite irate, saying, this is another add-on, we haven't got this capacity. And they were reassured at the time that actually it's a separate role. And in what we're seeing now is, who's best placed on the SLT to do that? Do you understand? It's pointing to one person. So this is a time where we need to be thinking about looking at A, our capacity, but B, who else on SLT could be that person to support you? Because it is a bit like the safeguarding governor. It's a lot for one person to take on. You know, they're volunteers like your SLT with also other leadership kind of responsibility.
I can see DSLs becoming a non-teaching role. The way it's going, I just can't see you having to teach at the same time, which actually I don't think is good for the DSL's well-being. I mean, I like to go into a classroom because then I see that things aren't all terrible. But also as an SLT, my job, all right, is safeguarding, but as an SLT, part of my job is to see what's going on in schools and to report back on being SLT.
I know.
And if I'm not in classrooms, then how do I know how the new homework system's gone down or the marking policy's gone down? So it is going to be interesting. And
I think that's more about reducing the timetable again and again. So, you know, to the point where you're almost teaching.
Open, and then there's 4 other things. Serious violence is brought up quite a lot, which links to the behaviour policies, which I think that DSLs have been on. Contextual safeguarding, but we've been talking about that for a long time.
We know that. And so to be honest, I did see that slip. So I did see with the everyone's invited, you know, there was an element of it was there, and it's actually embedded in lots of things, to be honest. When you think about contextual safeguarding, risk outside the family home, that came up in everyone's invited, you know, inside a school, outside a school, the parks, different areas. So one could argue it's actually embedded in everything we do.
Definitely.
Do you understand? So I'm glad we've got it back. So that could be, again, like KCSiE and CSE, it's on the same page, but we just have different conversations to bring it together.
And then the final change that I saw was clear what records should be made, i.e. decisions and phone calls. I mean, DSLs know that anyway, but it is interesting that they've put that in as you've got to record what decisions you're making.
I love that bit. I was laughing out loud. I love it. You know why I love it? Because I mean, I did some school improvement work when I worked for the local authority. I go in to do these audits, and I remember being presented with these lovely files. This is pre kind of electronic software of the concern forms back in those days. And I remember the classic was, unfortunately, some DSLs had it all in their head, just wrote down the action, but not the decision making. So I'm glad, in a serious case of use, you know, as a social work manager, my decisions were taken on board and I had to write down the whys. So it's really important that now, one could argue, DSLs are expected to, because you were in that place where you're making that decision about safeguarding. So I had a query on the training course before we broke up, the DSL course, when someone said, what's the definition, Anne-Marie, of and being resolved? Because it's also how it was resolved. And my comment was, in what's come into you as a concern, how did you respond and what was the outcome? That's my definition. Because if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, blah blah blah, definition is definition, isn't it? You know, in the sense of what is resolved. So I think it's important that don't get too precious about it. It's like, you know, how did you reply and what was your action? And why, definitely the why.
And
why.
who was involved in the decisions. So say
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
audits, who sat there on the audit? Was it always the same team that you do? I have a team of about 5. And if I'm honest with you, it's not every time I get exactly the same staff there, because we've all got busy lives. So sometimes I have
But
two
remember
staff.
though, KCSiE does say this, and this is something I have to remind people in. KCSiE does say that the DSL makes the ultimate decision, the lead decision.
Oh, yeah.
And
Our
KCSiE does say, I know, and KCSiE does say that if it doesn't warrant a referral, and the referral to social care is a definition of any suspicions of child abuse, which is massive.
Yeah.
So that's why I always say to DSLs to be on the safe side, the bigger picture of what you don't know, what social care might have on their data, contact social care first for advice. And then if it doesn't meet that threshold based on your concern plus what there's already know, then that's fine. So that's where I think, going back to resolve it, absolutely, did you contact social care as stated in Keeping Children Safe? It used to be page 97 2020 version. I think is 146 now in the new 14 plus extra version. But it's just remember what the wording says, because again, if there was a court case, they'd look at the paperwork of, did you do, the expected in your role, stated by, the state being Keeping Children Safe, the legal framework, yes or no. So if you did not contact social care based on that decision,
did it not meet your threshold? Yeah. And did you say we'll review it in a week's time and then we'll decide? That completely get it. And in the meantime, have you started to apply for consent from parents, or that kind of, because consent can take forever, so you can sit there saying, all right, that's the decision we made, but the outcome was whatever.
And remember, consent isn't always needed if it's safeguarding. So there's an element of, so remember, with consent, don't drain it too long. Don't exhaust it out, because you need to be mindful of risk to the child, especially the Friday classic, all the evenings, the whole element of that. And again, the last term I saw some of that where a parent deliberately was delaying.
Oh, they do, yeah.
And then the DSL waiting patiently, when actually for me the clock was ticking, and I was like, woohoo, you need to get that one in. So
yeah. Oh,
all
excellent.
Right. No problem.
I think that's the most of the changes for section 1, part 1.
Okay, fine. Well, we've done part 1 now, so let's get on to part 2.
All right then.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, Kerry.